Hello, and welcome to this panel, which is part of Springer Nature's virtual edition of the 2022 Frankfurt Book Fair. My name's Thea Sherer, and I'm Director of Sustainability at Springer Nature, and I'm delighted to be here today to discuss with some colleagues the role of publishers in championing diversity, equity and inclusion in academia and in scholarly publishing generally. So our topic is diversity, equity and inclusion. I'm going to use the acronym DEI in this session just to keep things simple. And I'm joined today by two people who, while both part of the Springer Nature group, come with some different perspectives on the role that publishers can play in this area and the actions that are being taken to make our sector more inclusive and equitable, and the same in our content, the content that we publish. So in the 5 years I've been at Springer Nature, DEI has been a topic of discussion throughout. It's not new, but I think it's fair to say that we've become more strategic in our approach. We're committing more resource and also collaborating more with others because we know that we need to raise the bar across the whole industry. And it's some of those themes that I'd like us to explore today. So I'm going to introduce to our two speakers. Firstly, Soumya Swaminathan. She chairs Springer Nature's Research and Solutions DEI Steering Group, and she sits on Springer Nature Group's DEI Council. And Soumya's been instrumental in creating a more focused approach to DEI at Springer Nature, and in particular the work that's happening with the wider network of researchers and authors that Springer Nature works with. Our second panellist is Celeste Beaver. She is Chief News and Features Editor at Nature, and she oversees the journalistic content that's published in Nature, the journal, and that reaches around 2.5 million readers out online. She also leads a team of reporters and editors all around the world who cover news and advances in science and research, science policy and community issues, and the implications of world events for science and research. So I'm really pleased to have both Soumya and Celeste to join me for this conversation because it means we can explore how an organisation sets out a strategic level to make a change and what that looks like for policies and guidance and partnerships. But also I'm interested and curious to understand more about how that works in practice in a very specific area. So just thinking about one journal, magazine, which has a really long history. And I think that brings quite a unique perspective and an opportunity. So DEI is a talking point for all sorts of different businesses of all sorts of shapes and sizes. But there's a view that I hear being expressed throughout publishing that as publishers, there's a bigger role to play in enabling or accelerating greater levels of inclusion and equity beyond the organisation itself. And I think that's really important for Springer Nature. So Soumya, from your perspective, could you just talk to us a little, please, about why this external dimension of DEI is important and how that also relates to how we think about DEI inside the organisation as well?
Thanks, Thea. Great to be here. So that's absolutely right. We started our journey on DEI with the internal perspective, which is very much focusing on creating a culture of inclusion and belonging within Springer Nature, focusing on representation within Springer Nature. But in the course of that journey, it became very clear to us that we have a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous responsibility to use the influence of our brands, our reach, to really propagate and advocate for these same values in the work we do externally as publishers. And so that is really what we're setting out to do with our external DEI program. It's underpinned by 4 pillars, and it's powered by a large group of extremely passionate colleagues within Springer Nature. And what we're really setting out to do is to embed our intention and our values around diversity, equity, and inclusion into the way we work and what we create. And really putting that into action through our workflows, developing resources and policies and processes that are going to help us turn that intention into reality, and then also really taking a careful look at the way we work within our communities.
Thank you. And the representation piece is clearly really important on both sides. And how do you know if we're making progress, I guess, in that area?
So let me just actually give you an example of a really gratifying success story that we've had, and that's with the Nature conferences, where within a matter of a couple of years of introducing a policy on gender diversity at Nature conferences, we were able to reach gender balance in our conference organizers, keynotes, and speakers. And I think two things were really key to that. One was actually embedding this intention in a formal way in the way we work with our partners, the partners we work with, in putting these conferences together. So there's a shared basis of understanding. The other was, of course, data collection. And data collection is, the way that we can monitor progress, hold ourselves accountable, but it's also enormously challenging. And it's a challenge not just for Springer Nature, but I think for all of us across the industry for a variety of reasons. One, publishers work across global footprints, so there are challenges collecting data across global jurisdictions with very different regulations in place about the kind of data that can be collected. Some of this data is sensitive, so you have to really be careful about, with GDPR regulations, storing the data in the right way. And then, while we all agree that collecting data is important, and it's also important for building future strategy and decisions, there's a real challenge around getting complete self-reported data. So I think one of the challenges for us as an industry, and I think in general with collecting self-reported data, is ensuring that you're really able to get enough data, good quality data, to then be able to make those future decisions.
And track progress, I guess, and
track
hold
progress.
yourselves to account
Absolutely.
and know that you're making a difference.
Absolutely.
And I know, Samia, that this area of data isn't something that just Springer Nature is thinking about. And clearly, when we're working with the research community, we need to make sure that we're not asking different questions from other organisations that are also working with researchers. So I know that there are a number of collaborative initiatives that we're involved with. Can you just talk a little bit about why that's so important, and maybe as well as data, what areas of focus those collaboration activities are focusing on?
Yeah, so partnerships and collaborations and working in coalition with our community and the industry is a key part of our strategy. It's a really important pillar for a number of reasons, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So at the industry level, we are members of the Joint Commitment for Inclusion, for taking action on inclusion and diversity in publishing. It's quite a mouthful, but effectively this is a coalition of a number of very diverse publishers from around the world, across disciplines, across models, large and small. And one of the really important things that the Joint Commitment has been able to do in the couple of years since it's launched is actually put forward recommendations on data collection, best practice for how to collect data across specific dimensions of diversity, and then to also work within the industry with the providers of infrastructure to help then make the case for data collection through these systems. So that is actually one, huge step forward, I think, for us as an industry. And of course, I think what that also allows us to do is develop a degree of interoperability. So we're all kind of beginning to work with related data sets so that we can then, work from a shared understanding of where we need to make progress. So that's one example of a collaboration. Another couple of examples, come from, we know that in order to do this work, capacity building, capacity strengthening is going to be a really important dimension for sustainable change. And so we're doing that by working directly within the research community to set up mentorship programs for early career researchers, bringing them into our networks of peer reviewers editorial board members, and so on. And we think that is going to be a very impactful way in which we can help drive change. And then the third aspect, and one that I'm really, really excited about, is really promulgating these values and recognizing good work through our awards program. And so we've just announced a partnership with Takeda. It's called the Nature Award for Inclusive Health Research. And here we're really looking to recognize diverse types of health research activities, especially as they pertain to historically underserved patient groups and communities and low and middle income countries. So those are just 3 examples of how we're working within the industry and within the community through collaborations to affect the change we want to see.
Yeah. No, that it's really exciting seeing those things take off. A lot of what you're working on, Soumya, and with the steering group that you work with relates to research that we publish from the community, and there's pieces there also around guidance and policy and where we can drive improvements, I guess, and encourage best practice. And that's something that happens in other areas as well, like research integrity and so on. So before I move to Celeste, where we're going to talk actually about that more independent, I suppose, content that we publish through our journalism, is there anything just to add there around that sort of role that we can play as publishers where the content isn't produced by us, it's produced in the community?
Yeah, so diverse representation in our content in terms of course, the types of authors and reviewers we work with, but also the themes and perspectives that we provide a platform for is a big focus across research publishing. And across research publishing, we work with a very large external network of editorial board members, editors-in-chief. So we are putting a lot of effort and investing a lot of time in developing resources that can help provide insight and support into becoming more inclusive in our publishing editorial practices across research publishing. But that's, of course, very different from the sorts of decisions and opportunities that Nature, a journal with a very expansive magazine section, has. And so those are some of the ways in which we're working across a diverse portfolio.
Thanks, Soumya. I think that's one of the big challenges, really, in these different areas. So Celeste, I know that Nature has been reflecting a lot and has taken some really interesting steps over the past couple of years, particularly in thinking about issues related to race. And there is a racism related special issue, I think, going live this month. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that, what it is and how it came about?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's taken more than a year to conceive and produce. And we first committed to dedicating a special issue of the journal to racism in science following George Floyd's murder in June 2020. So as part of that, we were one of many institutions that pledged to listen, learn, change. We said that publicly in an editorial. We acknowledge that science has been complicit in systemic racism and must strive harder to correct some of those injustices. And as part of that, we promised to dedicate a special issue to racism in science. And we also said it would be guided by we said it would be guided by a guest editor. That sort of evolved, and where we've landed is that we actually have 4 external guest editors working with us on the issue. One is a political scientist, one's a geneticist, one's a climate activist, one works at a philanthropic organisation. So we've got a really broad spectrum of people. And they kind of kicked the process off publicly in June when they published a signed editorial titled "Science Must Overcome Its Racist Legacy," where they laid out why they were doing this, what they hoped the special would achieve. And it was the first, at least to our knowledge, the first time an editorial has ever been signed by external guest editors in Nature's history. So, that made something of a statement of the importance that we're giving to this. Should I talk?
Yeah, no, tell us about what's in it, and and also maybe a bit about the process of how you determine that with the guest editors. I think that would be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, so like I said, I think it was about a year ago that we first brought them on board and started working with them. And so since then, we each one was given oversight over a certain section of the magazine. So, for example, I've been working most closely with what we called the journalism group, and we've been working with one of the guest editors. That's entailed a monthly meeting where we talk about content and what stories we might produce and tell in collaboration with her. And that's been going out throughout the magazine in all the different groups. And now we're at the stage where we're editing it and everyone's looking at it and reviewing it and discussing it. But it was this kind of process of a regular meeting together and really trying to make these two different sort of people that would not normally come together to do this working together, which has been really interesting. Just so I kind of really understand that as well, the purpose of working with the guest editors and that is to make sure again that we're that Nature is really reflecting a wider set of issues and understanding than perhaps we would be able to do without that external perspective. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. I mean, one of the problems that we've identified is that we have very few people from underrepresented groups, in particular Black people, on our editorial team. So, not having those voices when we're making decisions about what to cover and how to cover them, and then going out and covering them, we've already identified as a shortcoming that impacts our work and our journalism. And so, that this has addressed some of that. So just having that voice in the room when we're making these decisions and guiding our stories has definitely changed what we've come up with. And they've also helped us identify some gaps, shortcomings. Some things haven't worked out. Some things we wanted to do have been harder than we thought. So I think there's also been learning there.
So tell us a little bit about the content itself, and especially which sort of areas of content you're most excited to see going live.
Yeah, so we've landed with about 12 different stories around exploring science's racist legacy and how to overcome it. They span all the magazine sections: news features, comment, news and views, the careers section, and multimedia. And some of the ones I'm most excited about, I'm excited about all of them. And I quite like, the scope is quite amazing in terms of how many sort of different parts of science, I suppose, that racism actually touches. But we've got a feature that looks at efforts to tackle racism in computer science, and specifically the lack of Black people in computer science. And, we ended up doing that because it's a field where a lack of different groups can lead to bias in algorithms, technologies, and systems that the whole world is using and that they will be using much more in future. So it's about science and research, but it's also much the impact of it goes far beyond that to society and life, human endeavor. So things like facial recognition software that doesn't recognize or misidentifies people of color, autonomous vehicles that can't recognize darker skinned people. These are all kind of things that have happened when there hasn't been enough diversity in the room when things were built or decided. And then we've got a piece chronicling efforts to decolonize research institutions, in particular in the UK, with a focus on Imperial College. And that also explores the impact of the colonial legacy on today's researchers, which I think makes that piece also really, really interesting, because it's not just something in the past. It's looking at why and how that affects people now.
And I think linking back to what Sarami was talking about earlier, this again comes back to this point: if we have better representation in the research, in all of the different aspects of where we work as a publisher of research, those stories and those topics maybe better represented in the published literature, but also better reflect the whole of society in the work that they're doing. So it's, I think, a really practical example of what we're driving for in that bigger picture piece. And I know, Celeste, you've also been thinking about this. This isn't just a kind of one-off, let's do this special issue and then move on. There's a bigger piece of work around what that means for the journal on an ongoing basis, and then other aspects of the ways that you work. Can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there's some ways that just working with the guest editors has changed how we work. It's taught us to listen, and it's also kind of reinforced our commitment to the topic. Just having people who are so driven by this that they've given this time to us, and dedicated themselves to that. And then, I mean, more specifically, we're looking how some of the items in the special might become a piece of regular coverage. So this decolonization of imperial is going to be a series that may go on for, I don't know, might just keep a recurring sort of piece, but that explores similar efforts across many more institutes and fields of science. You can imagine as more and more people are doing this, that could keep going for a long time, or as people learn new things about how to go about doing that. We're also looking, one of the pieces on multimedia is about health inequities. And again, there's so much more scope there that that may well become a sort of regular show or appointment. We're also looking at better representation in the imagery of science, and the idea that the problem we can't solve that on our own as Nature the Journal. It requires kind of the whole ecosystem around us that are, from, you can't take a picture of someone if it's not there. And so you need better representation in these fields. If photographers aren't in certain places to photograph it, if picture agencies aren't also part of this, we don't actually take a lot of our own pictures. These are sourced elsewhere. So we're looking at how we might be part of a bigger effort there. And we're also, it's really, we tried really, really hard to make sure that we were using a big diversity of writers for the special. We didn't want everything to be written by someone white when the whole point was to write about racism. But it was, it did highlight that through doing that effort for so many pieces, it did highlight to us how few people we have from some underrepresented groups. So I think that's something we really want to improve.
Great, thank you. And I think the question I would just ask to both of you, and hearing all of this stuff that's happening, what else do you think we need to do? Maybe not necessarily at Springer Nature, or it could be, but also across the industry. What would you most like to see change? And if you kind of imagine yourself in 3 or 5 or 10 years' time, looking back, what will make you think, yeah, actually, this work that we've done, we've really made a difference with, and we've made progress? And maybe Saumya, I'll ask that of you first.
Yeah. Thanks, Thea. Let me just say, though, that I'm really looking forward to reading this special issue at Nature, and it's great to see that tackling with these issues has been so generative for Nature. It's led to so many fresh ideas and new opportunities, and really that's exactly what we hope to do throughout the programme, is for it to open doors, and as we address the challenges, for there to be really new opportunities. So what I hope is that within 3 years, we as an organisation are able to create embed the change in the way we work, really put in place what we need in terms of resources, policies, processes, support to embed that change. And that's not just across research and solutions, but actually across, for example, our digital and our platforms, and, really so it becomes part of our DNA. And that alongside we are working with the community and the industry to make change within the research community, not just in terms of representation, but also making inclusion and representation the default by design. When you're thinking about how you design a research study, how you work it within the context of a global collaboration, you approach it from the perspective of inclusion and equity. So we've, released a couple of what I think are really impactful policies and guidance in this area, and I really hope that through our journals and through working with other like-minded stakeholders, including funders, that we're really able to slowly but surely effect change. And then within 5 to 10 years, really see the impact on the kind of content we're publishing and who is publishing that content. So that's, we're really in this for the long haul, and I think it's going to be years that we'll have to dedicate ourselves to.
Yeah, thanks, Samia. And Celeste, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back, the two things that I would sort of measure our success by are what I already mentioned, which was, the representation among our staff and our contributors from underrepresented groups, so that we're seeing many more people from those groups, journalists or scientists, expert authors who write for us, and also on our staff as editors and staff reporters. And then the other thing would be that those people are also more represented in our coverage. So a higher proportion of the sources that we're speaking to and that we're depicting in our imagery are Black, are Indigenous, are people of colour, or come from the global South or other regions that are neglected. And then, that the hope from those two things would be that it leads to sensitive, regular coverage of issues that affect these people and those communities, and in which we allow those people to speak about their experiences.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining this panel and just for talking us through some of what you're working on. I think it's really, it's very involved. It takes a lot of commitment, and it's just, I'm very pleased to hear how much is being done also with the wider community and in collaboration with others, because I think that's where we know that we need many, many people to change and to act to make a big difference. So yeah, if you'd like to find out more about some of Springer Nature's work in this area, you can visit our website, springernature.com/sustainable business. Or you can, of course, take a look at nature.com for the special issue that Celeste has been talking about. And we'll add links to the content into the notes for this Frankfurt Book Fair Virtual Hub Special Edition. So thank you, Samia and Celeste, and goodbye from me as well.